Hi everyone, welcome to chapter 1 of my video project. Today I'm going to be teaching you a little bit more about glosses. Gloss is what we use to write out ASL. We do this because ASL is such a visual language. It's really hard to actually write it down with a pen and paper. A lot of times what you might see is different collections of images to show you what signs might mean. Gloss is really useful because it takes words and it brings symbols in, so that way you can try to visualize what some of those signs are without having to see pictures or videos of those signs being done. So before we can talk about classifiers, we first have to talk about how we write out some of those classifiers. The first thing that we look at when writing classifiers is what specifically is within that gloss. So we do have kind of a formula for how those classifiers are written out in gloss. The first things you'll see is CL, that stands for classifier. After that you might see a colon or a hyphen, either one works out fine. And then you're going to see the symbol that represents the hand shape your hand is doing throughout that classifier. So that might include an A hand shape, which would be like this, or a C hand shape like that. So all those different things will be shown throughout the gloss. One thing to keep in mind is that if you're using two hands inside of that classifier, if that classifier calls for it, then the actual letter or the symbol will be duplicated. So you might see two C's, and that would mean that you're using two C hands in that classifier. You might see two ones, and that would mean you're using two one hands inside that classifier. So you can use those throughout the gloss to try to figure out exactly how many hands you're using and how you're setting up the scene inside of that sentence. So in some writings of gloss, it's also customary to write out what exactly that classifier is doing during that hand shape. So let's say you're writing out a gloss and it's not really shown inside the context of that sentence what that hand shape is supposed to be signifying. It's okay to put some parentheses and write out what that hand shape is actually supposed to be doing. So let's say you have two people walking past a tree, and you have the tree here and then the two people are walking. You can write out that the two people are walking along using that classifier. Although this is true, in most cases context will provide enough information, so don't worry about describing every single classifier you use as long as context explains it. So there's also multiple symbols that you're going to use when describing your classifiers, and these will be really great because they provide a lot of context for what your hands are doing without having to write out long sentences. So some of these symbols are going to be listed next. So the greater than sign put next to a classifier shows that that sign is turned at the wrist. So what that means is if you're using, let's say, CLC with that turn sign, your hand will make the C shape and then turn, and this would be often used with a cup or something like that. So that's how that sign would look. An asterisk means that the hand is flattened when you're using that classifier. So let's say we're talking about CLC and you see that asterisk show up right next to it. Your hand will be making a C shape and then it'll get flattened and then often put like this so it can show you're handing out a book or something like that. And let's say you see it with two asterisks and two C's. That means that you're going to be using two C hands that are both flattened and both of them are carrying something like maybe a box or you have to get something down from a shelf. So both of those will be utilized and the asterisk will be doubled with the C hand shape. Two dots over one of your symbols will show that the hand shape is bent when you're utilizing it. So if we're talking about CL5 with those two dots right above it, you're going to see your hand goes from a 5 hand to a 5 hand. So an arrow next to the symbols is meant to show movement with the hand shape. So you might see CLCC, right? And if there's an arrow right next to it, that means that you're going to be moving those hands. Another way you might see that arrow hand shape is if it's squiggly. So that squiggly hand shape will show more movement. So that means that maybe the movement is squiggling along. So sometimes you might see CL4 with two squiggles. That means you might see a movement a little bit more like this. And often that's used to show people maybe filling an arena or something like that. ASL is a famously visual language. Because of this, it might be just a little bit harder to write down than some of the languages like English or Spanish. But it is important to keep in mind that ASL is always changing, and because of that, we're always finding new glosses and new ways to write down some of the signs that are being innovated in the day-to-day. So always remember to keep your eyes peeled for some of those new glosses that you might see floating around. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.